So we have game one of Excel versus Radix. So on the blue side we have Radix with Shen, Kha'Zix, Orianna, Lucian, and Braum. So they have very good AoE. They want to team fight with the Kha'Zix going in and Orianna ball, and they have like the Shen that can go with the Kha'Zix as well with his ulti. So this kind of composition is like good when you manage to get like a few people together and you start the fight, and then Braum has very good follow up. However, whenever you play against disengaged compositions, for example, you're playing against Nami, or if you're going to play against Gragas, it's going to be a bit more complicated, and it's also very weak against split push comps if you have a four-man unit which is strong enough, because then they can pressure Shen out of the lane, and if he decides to ulti, then they're just going to continue the split push. On the other side, you have Fiora, Elise, Victor, Tristana, and Rakan. So this is essentially a split push composition. You can see that specifically with the Fiora pick. So they have some pick potential with the Rakan and the Elise, and like Rakan goes in, Elise cocoons, and it's possible to get some picks off. The wave clear is alright in the late game, but in the mid game, I feel like it's kind of meh because Tristana and Victor don't yet have enough items to wave clear very well. But I do think that because they have the Fiora, Excel should be able to split push pretty easily. Shen should not be able to stand against a Fiora later in the game, and I don't think that as the game goes on, they're going to be able to outfight them as a four, because Tristan and Victor scale really well. So if Radix do play the early game well enough, then they could win the game. But if Excel get a few kills in the early game, then Excel will win the game. I do think with these compositions, Excel should take the game. So game one of Excel versus Radix was a rather slow-paced game in the early stages. We had a very dangerous invade by Excel on the enemy blue buff, where we had Kronos that tried to pick away the blue, but his team was a bit late to assist him in the blue buff. No one died at that point, but Excel, two members of Excel did go away with just a sliver of health. The first blood came at 7 minutes into the game, which is rather late, and it is important to know that at 14 minutes there were only 4 kills that were taken in the game. 2 towers were down at that point, both for Excel and both in the mid lane. I'm going to go further with more analysis of this particular play a bit later on. Because Elise managed to get 3 kills at that point, it was 40 minutes into the game. They were not necessarily ahead in lanes, but Elise had enough pressure during the game so that the laners from Radix had to play a bit safer, because they couldn't afford to die to an Elise gank. And Excel were rather happy with that, considering that they were just farming it out. They weren't forcing any plays which were unnecessary. And in the end, they did use their composition with a 1-4 where Fiora went top, the other 4 went bottom side, and although Radix did try a couple of times to do a play whenever they tried to do something, Excel would get another objective on the other side of the map in return. So Excel did do a very clean game, and I think it was good communication overall. I'm not 100% sure because I don't listen into the comms, but it felt like Excel knew what they were doing and they didn't rush any part of the game. Even though the game does finish at 28 minutes, it felt like they didn't do any stupid plays. So there are two plays which I want to further analyze on in this game, and they show two very separate things. So the first one is a highlight which talks about a really smart play which can work with pretty much any composition, and the second one is really showcase of how Excel played their composition at their full potential. So in the first clip, you can see Elise ganking mid. So 45 seconds ago, she did Herald, the Rift Herald buff, and straight after she goes mid, takes the kill on Oriana, and after taking the kill on Oriana, she puts the Rift Herald in the mid lane straight after, so that they can easily take a turret. Because Oriana was dead, they had no one to defend the mid turret, even though Kha'Zix was around to try and defend the turret, but he didn't feel comfortable enough because he could have been dived by that strong Elise plus Oriana combo. So he just let it go, and a second tower falls down because the rest of the team just preferred staying on their respective lanes and not defending mid. What could have happened for Radix is asking the support to roam mid to not let the Herald take the second turret. But clearly, that was really good play by Excel to take down two turrets in the mid lane and just swarmed for the rest of the game. The second highlight I want to go through now is the one which shows how Excel used their composition. So you have Fiora in the top lane while the others are bot lane. So it's essentially a 1-4. Oriana comes top to try and take the Fiora, but she's playing it really smart. And whenever they see that Oriana is top, the other lanes try to apply pressure themselves. Radix do try and engage in the bottom side, so they use Shen's ult to make the play, which enables Fiora to hit a free turret. So instead of going for the free turret, Excel respond by killing the Oriana top lane and then moving down towards the mid to take down the mid inhibitor turret. So they could have taken top as well, most likely, but they preferred playing it safe, and they managed to get the inhibitor turret off that. So this just showed how Fiora was really oppressive against the Shen. When she's split pushing, Shen cannot ulti for he can't ulti unless they really want to make fight. So that's what they did, but it enables Fiora to just carry the game by herself. There, yeah. My MVP for this game will have to be Elise because I didn't feel like there were any outstanding performers on Excel, mainly because there was no real possibility of particularly being outstanding considering they finished early game, whereas their champions shine more in the later stages of the game. So I am giving it to Elise because she managed to do a very clean early game. She managed to save herself from dying in the early stages of the game, and the pressure she put on the lanes was good enough for her laners to be safe. And the play that she made, the one I highlighted just before, was really fantastic, and it really opened up the map for Excel. When you take two turrets mid, then the outer turrets of the side lanes do fall much faster, and this was a great jungle performance by Kronos. Alright, so for this game, we have game 2, Excel against Radix. For Excel, we have Renekton top, Olaf jungle, Orianna mid, Caitlyn AD carry, and Rakan support. So, in my opinion, this composition is really the kind of composition that goes in, run towards the enemy. You want to stop them from running away. Well, I mean, not let them go away. You have the Rakan taunt, you have Olaf running in, you have the double Renekton dash. And Caitlyn with her ulti can follow up pretty well as Orianna move speed. So you really want to go for these fights, go for these. It's not really the fights, but you can pick the enemy if they're not positioned quite well. So what Excel probably want to do is have a lot of deep vision, so that they can catch anyone from the other team which might be out of position. On the other hand, you have Radix Esports that have Jax top, Elise jungle, Corki mid, Varus ADC, and Karma support. So this is very much a poke composition with an element of split pushing. I'm not that much of a fan with taking the Jax with such a composition, because with Elise, Corki, Varus, and Karma, you do exert a lot of pressure under the turrets, but you're never able to fight. So if the enemy team goes with two of them top lane, for example, to get Jax, so you have Renekton, Olaf trying to get a kill on Jax, then Radix won't be able to force a fight or force an objective, because they have poke, and so they expect people to be defending in order to use the poke effectively. So I believe that one against the other, Excel do have the advantage, because what is good against poke compositions is having hard engage, is having that element of running towards them by surprise. So I do believe that Excel should take this game based off the compositions. The win condition for Radix Esports, though, would be to have Jax having enough pressure on his lane to let the other four go for an objective. I do think it's the other lanes do have to have an advantage as well. Otherwise, the poke comp is going to feel pretty ineffective against Olaf and Rakan running on them. Yeah, so XL Esports win condition is just to go for the picks between the objectives, have deep vision, and then rotate from one lane to another. So game 2 of Excel versus Radix also had a very slow start to the game. Comparatively, there were 4 kills in game 1 at 14 minutes. In this game, there were 3 kills at 14 minutes. So once again, this was a very slow-paced game. But once again, Elise was on the team with the early advantage. Elise had I believe 3-1-2 score at some point where she put the Jax ahead. Jax was a monster this game, but it was not enough overall. I mean, spoiler alert, Excel won the game in the end. So what happened at 14 minutes is Excel did exactly the same thing as they did the last game with the Rift Herald, where they pushed down 2 turrets, although this time around I don't remember if it was with Rift Herald. That was yesterday. And I did take notes down, but I did not write that. Otherwise, there was a very good use of the of killing Baron. So Excel were at an advantage at that point with a very very strong Inax and an Oriana ult which could decimate the entire team, and Radix were trying to contest the Baron by going around it behind the pit, and although they were behind the pit, Excel did harass them a lot to stop them from going for the steal, and they harassed them enough that they were forced to back away from the Baron, and it gave them a free Baron. And I must say that in the end, there was a really, really good show by Inax. And yeah. So for this game, unlike last game, it was a much longer game. So we did get to see one player shine in particular in that last fight. That was a very ballsy, aggressive flash. I'm going to show the clip, and honestly, it was fantastic play by Inax, and it's not just one thing which made me choose Inax as the MVP. I felt like Excel overall made a few mistakes individually. Most players did mess up a few things, whereas Inax was very very consistent, and he kind of played or always played safe and never tried to be too aggressive. And overall, I do think he deserves the MVP for this game. All right, so in the second game, sorry, so in the first game of Enclave against Feenix, we have composition of Enclave which has Jarvan, Gragas, Victor, Caitlyn, and Braum. So with this composition, you have some pretty good engage tools with the Jarvan ult, with the Gragas ult, and you have some nice follow up with Victor and possible Braum multi. So in this case, you essentially want to fight, team fight, and go for the easy picks, which for people that overextend a little bit. On the other side, you have Feenix. So their composition is Kled top, Elise jungle, Oriana mid, Ashe, and then Zyra. So they have a clear team fighting comp, with the Ashe Zyra offering a very good engage tool with their respective ultis. You have Oriana with her ult, which is able to catch them out, and then Kled offers the extra movement speed. However, what we can see with their composition is that they are rather immobile with their three main damage dealers. So, in this particular context, you have the Braum with his shield, which is gonna stop Ashe from doing consistent damage, but it doesn't stop the Oriana, it doesn't stop Zyra, so the Braum pick isn't really useful in this case. We do have, in my opinion, a better draft for Feenix, as they are able to fight better, and if they do get engaged on, which is kind of what Enclave wants to do, they do have the damage to return the initial engage. Game one, Enclave versus Feenix. This was a rise from the ashes of Feenix. Feenix were great during most of the game. The Ashe arrows were on point with Zyra follow up. That was really, really good team play by Feenix. So in the end, it was a very fight-oriented game where there were many attempts of getting kills on the Feenix side, and that is kind of how Feenix thrive, and it's been shown in the past games. Is they play best when they manage to make other teams play their style, which is fight until you die. And this is exactly what happened this game, where many times Jokerism got caught out a bit too extended in lane. Same with Diva, and overall, Rapster was phenomenal on that Ashe. So to continue from what I was saying, Rapster MVP. This was a phenomenal performance where you see really good usage of the Ashe arrows. They were very proactive, and it wasn't used as a last case scenario. He tried and tried and tried, and every time they would hit an arrow, there was follow up, and they would pretty much decimate whoever was caught. So I want to give real props to Rapster for playing such an effective game, and he's been put on Ashe very often, and this game it shows why it can be useful. And as the casters did point out at one point, this was the best usage of Ashe that we saw in the UK in a long while, and I perfectly agree. Rapster was fantastic with that Ashe. For game two of Enclave against Feenix, we have Feenix on blue side with Camille top, Gragas jungle, Orianna mid, Ashe ADC, and Zyra support. So essentially, they've not changed their three main damage dealers in the bottom side of the map. So they still have this team composition is still a very good team fighting composition. Camille can catch out someone pretty easily after Ashe arrows them. I feel like there's isn't that much as much engaged as last time, but if Ashe does hit an arrow, they do have a lot of good follow up. And yeah, on the other side we have Enclave with Fiora top, Rek'Sai jungle, LeBlanc mid, Xayah ADC, and Karma support. So with this team composition, you essentially see a 1-3-1 where you have Igloo and LeBlanc that want to split push, and then Rek'Sai, Xayah, and Karma should try and defend as a 3. I do think, however, looking one comp compared to the other, it's going to be really hard for Enclave to defend the towers because there is pretty low wave clear. Karma does offer a lot as a support, but with the engage from Ashe, with her arrow, it's going to be really hard. And Xayah is better against Ashe. Overall, I do favor. That is a good question. Both compositions have their strengths, and I can see both of them actually winning against each other. And I will say that Enclave will win out this one because they will be able to pressure out the side lanes better this time around. And because the Xayah can disengage Ashe's ult, I do think they can survive as a 3 if they don't actually look for hectic plays. So for game 2 of Enclave versus Feenix, I don't remember it too much. I mean, I watched it yesterday. I do remember some things, but honestly, I can't be bothered to rewatch it right now. I want to put out the video on time. I'm still figuring out the format. So during that game, we had a very, very, very strong early game by Enclave Gaming with Fed LeBlanc, Fed Jokerism. I mean, that's not a champion, but he was Fed, and pretty much like every player was Fed. Yet Enclave managed to do what Enclave do best, is mess up the mid game. And they didn't play the 1-3-1 correctly. When they had double TP, what they had to do was put LeBlanc on one lane, put Camille on the other lane, put Fiora on the other lane and have the other three group up together, and they could have won pretty easy due to the pressure on the side lanes. But there were often times where the split pushers were grouping up or didn't wait for the other lanes to have pressure before pressuring themselves. So Feenix almost made a comeback, but Enclave love draws, so they did draw. In the end, it was too close compared to the 12k gold lead that they had at one point, which narrowed down to a 2k gold lead before going back to an 8k gold lead, I believe, when they finish off the game. So Enclave didn't show a clean game, which could have been really clean had they finished at 25 minutes, but yeah, they didn't. And Feenix did play well, even though it was mostly Enclave's mistake. My MVP for this game will have to be D.Va. So D.Va had a phenomenal performance on LeBlanc. So I know I like saying players have phenomenal performances, but that was the case once again. Unfortunately, I almost didn't pick him because his mid game was really shaky. He did go deep with LeBlanc and got caught out by some Orianna Shockwaves, by some Ash arrows, which could have easily been avoided. Uh, but she was still there to kill the targets which had to be killed at crucial moments of the game, and the mechanics on LeBlanc were really on point. D.Va did uh, show that he was really dominant on that LeBlanc, and he is my choice for MVP for this game. So for game one of Barrage versus Nerdrage, we have Barrage on the blue side with Jarvan, Zac, Orianna, Ashe, and Braum. So this composition is a classic composition of you want to fight and you can engage from far. There's good pick potential and there's good team fight potential. What is weak against this kind of composition is mobility and any kind of hard disengage. For example, I don't know, a Nami. Although Braum does counter the Nami ult, if Barrage do engage, Nami cannot, Braum cannot stop Nami's wave. So yeah, that is for Barrage's composition. On the other side, we have Nerdrage with Jax, Nidalee, Syndra, Varus, and Janna. So this composition is more of a split push composition, and Nidalee is able to maneuver from one lane to another pretty easily between Jarvan's lane and then the lane of three with Varus, Janna, and Syndra. Nidalee is good at counter jungling and has okay ganking. I'm not a big fan of Nerdrage's composition. So if we want to put them one against the other, I do give the advantage to Barrage Esports simply because although you do have a split pusher and Barrage's team composition is not necessarily adapted for that, they have enough hard engage to actually give up on the split push and kill the enemy team during this during this time. I can't find the words. Anyways, we'll see how it plays out. So first game of Barrage versus Nerdrage. So Nerdrage had a very good early game with Nutri on Nidalee, which went pretty ham on the lanes, gained an advantage in the bottom lane. Although he did kind of fall with CS pressure, Zac was out farming him a bit. But overall, Nerdrage had a better early game, even though they got a small scare at around 10 minutes where Barrage managed to kill simultaneously in the mid lane and in the 2v2 at the bottom lane, and they get a first turret off of that. But that was not enough for Barrage to snowball the game and get the team fights that they wanted to get. Nerdrage managed to play a very hectic playstyles to force Barrage into fights that they wanted them to take. So oftentimes they were out of position, but Barrage weren't synchronized enough to get the kills, to chain CC correctly, and they would actually use many ultimates on a single target, which didn't always work out in the end. Still, I believe that Nerdrage played it out pretty well. Yeah, I'm still not convinced with the drafting phase that they did have, although they managed to beat a team fighting composition with the Jax, which was really strong. He managed to get a solo kill in the beginning. Yeah. So my MVP pick for this game will be Artorias on this Jax. He managed, as I said, to get a kill 1v1 in the top lane. That was uh, really the beginning of the end for Barrage. So you had Artorias going from lane to lane, exerting the pressure that he needed to put, and when there were team fights and Nerdrage seemed to be having the lower hand, Jax came in at the right moment and boosted them back in the game, and every fight was won because Jax was always there at the right times. There was also a time where he followed Zac deep in the jungle, and he knew the limits on that Jax pick. I feel Artorias did have a really good game. Nutri was close to that MVP position, but I feel like there were times where he got caught out unnecessarily, which is why I picked Artorias for the MVP this game. For game 2 of this series, we have Nerdrage on the blue side with Fiora, Ivan, Lulu, Caitlyn, and Corki. So this is both a split pushing and a hyper carry comp. So the early game isn't that good for Nerdrage, even though Corki has a good mid game and does do a lot of burst. Fiora will want to split push the entire time while Ivan and Lulu help Caitlyn and Corki how do you say that? Wave clear correctly. I do like this composition. This is pretty old school with the current meta, but it works out fine. And yeah. So on the other side, we have Barrage Esports with Jace, Nunu, Syndra, Jin, and Karma. What does this team composition do? Uh, yeah. I mean, I'm figuring it out as I speak. We have some. Uh, I honestly I don't know. I don't like this composition at all. It doesn't really have much. Karma Jin, Nunu Jin, Syndra with Jace. I don't like this composition. So if you put one composition against the other, I do prefer Nerdrage's composition, simply because there is an idea behind it. I really don't see Barrage's win conditions here. So I think this will be a pretty easy game. Not necessarily a fast game, but it shouldn't be too hard for Nerdrage to close this one out. So we have game 2 of Barrage versus Nerdrage. So in this game, in the early stages, we have Nerdrage, which go in a good 2v2 bot lane where Monk gets 2 kills. When we see this, we think, oh shit, Nerdrage might actually falter because of disrespect. Uh, we can see that Nerdrage, like, if, as the game goes on, does have a pretty good early game. They do get 3 towers while Barrage get 3 towers while Nerdrage only get the one. This shows that Nerdrage, Barrage, even though their composition had no goal whatsoever, was good enough to be able to take objectives in the early game. So as the game progressed and as Nerdrage composition came into effect, mainly because you need time to scale with the Caitlyn as a hyper carry and Fiora for the split push. Once the 24-25 minute mark hit, there was absolutely no way Barrage could ever win a fight, and it was actually so strong that within 5 minutes, Nerdrage closed out the game. This just shows how composition, which is very poorly drafted, can really just finish a game within seconds. The damage output from the Jin and Syndra is inefficient when you have so much protection with the Lulu and the Ivan. So overall, I must commend Nerdrage for picking a very strong composition and not giving up too much in the early stages, although there were many mistakes that shouldn't have happened early on. Uh, yeah. So my MVP for this game will have to be Nutri on the Ivan. He did a good top focused play to shut down the Jace and bring the Fiora ahead, so that it's pretty much how the matchup goes. If Fiora is a bit ahead of Jace, Jace will never ever come back in the game. So putting Fiora ahead was a very smart move, and overall Nutri was very smart with his plays on Daisy, with the shielding he used, and overall his jungle pathing was pretty effective against the Nunu. He didn't get out jungled at all, and I would say that he actually played. They played on opposite sides, and Nutri adapted his playstyle to that. I think Kakan also had a great game, but he was a bit over aggressive, whereas Nutri did manage to play an overall almost perfect game. So MVP to Nutri. So for Eminem against Bulldog, we have Eminem on the blue side with Jace, Nunu, Kassadin, Ashe, and Thresh. So their composition relies on pick and on chasing down the enemy with the Nunu, with the Casa jump, with the Jace speed up. They can fight pretty well as do a pretty effective 1-3-1 with Jace and Kassadin on the side lanes, and Ashe, Thresh, and Nunu being a nuisance in the mid lane, which I think is how they should play it out. On the other hand, we have Bulldog Esports with Vladimir top, Warwick jungle, Riven mid, Tristana AD carry, and Tom Ken support. So they have a strong individual picks in a sense. Um, they have good AOE during the fights. They do have that one pick potential with the Warwick. Stunner scale as well, but overall, I do think that they don't synergize very well together. I suppose that win condition would be to try and uh, let the game scale far enough so that Tristana and Vladimir can become unkillable. If we now look at both compositions, I do prefer that of Eminem Gaming because the 1-3-1 will be really effective against Bulldog Esports. They won't be able to um, play against to match the 1-3-1. And if they try to hard engage, I feel like they don't really have enough to be able to kill the Ashe, Nunu, and Thresh in the mid lane. And if they do decide to go in another lane, then they will probably lose a lot of other objectives because of that. In the first game of Eminem against Bulldog, we have Bulldog, which take a slight advantage in the early stages of the game. However, the advantage that they take through strong laning phase won't be enough to take the game overall. We have a very good team fighting from Eminem, where once they group together, they just go in and go hard. And that's something which I often see with these with Eminem, and it's been the same with past iterations as well. Is it doesn't really matter how the early game plays out if they don't lose too badly, but at one point they will just click together and push through the lanes and take everything. And this was another example of that. So the 1-3-1 was not necessary. They didn't really use it because they didn't have to. There was one fight where they did have Jace in the top lane who TP'd behind. That was the first fight where they did a 5-4-0, which was nicely played, and then they just continued rolling over Bulldog in the end of the game. So for this game, my MVP choice is Toaster. He was very good in the later stages of the game. His positioning and fighting was intense. He knew how to dish out the damage whilst always remaining safe. In the early game, he did have a little bit of trouble against Bulldog, but that was mainly due to a lot of pressure being applied in the bottom side of the map. And I feel like Toaster overall had a pretty good game, which is why he's my MVP for this game. For game 2 of Eminem versus Bulldog, we have Bulldog on the blue side with Fiora top, Zac jungle, Cassiopeia mid, Ashe ADC, and Lulu support. So with this composition, we have Fiora, which is a good split pusher, Zac, which is good at engaging and catching out people, Ashe is good at catching out people, Cassiopeia is good at chasing, and Lulu is a pretty. It's decent in many compositions, but she thrives at protecting her AD carry or going for these big like 4-3-4 man knockup in the middle. I don't feel like their composition together has a real identity, although they do have two power picks with the Zac and the Fiora, which seems alright if you can get a good early game. But I do think they're still lacking a real identity, a real win condition with their team composition. On the other side, we have Eminem with Kale, Nunu, Hawkeye, Kalista, and Braum. So this is pretty much a attack speed based composition, where you have Nunu who can speed up pretty much any AD carry. So KO is not exactly an AD carry, but she functions as one. So they do have both types of damage, with Corki and KO dishing out AP damage, Kalista dishing out the AD carry damage. Yet they're all attack speed based. We also have Braum, which is very good in the front line with Nunu to stop any skill shot from the opponents, and the carries behind can pretty safely dish out the damage with the constant auto attacking. So if we put both rosters one against the other, I do have a preference for Eminem's roster. I think Zac can be a problem, but overall Fiora doesn't win out the 1v1 against Kale, which is one of the rare champions where Fiora cannot actually win hard, and
and doesn't outscale. So Eminem are fine with in that regards. And then for the rest, Ash Arrow is just going to be stopped by Brom in most cases, and I do believe that they can siege turrets pretty easily. Dak is the only real threat in catching them out, but I still don't think it's enough. In this game of Eminem against Bulldog, Eminem were pretty um, weren't having a really good early game again. So this is a case of Bulldog. They didn't. It was pretty equal at the beginning, where there were kills which went on both sides, and overall it was kind of interesting to watch, but it was like nothing peculiar. Like it was just kills getting traded, with the junglers being there at the right time and a lot of things. And then at one point, once again, Eminem group top. They take a few turrets, and that's where Bulldog really faltered. Is that they didn't use their advantages in the early game to actually take the turrets. I mean, they weren't ahead, but they could have traded objectives. But Eminem essentially just went for objectives without a trade on the other side. So I feel like Eminem just played it out like the first game, where they didn't pay particular attention to the early game and just steamrolled at one point when they grouped up together. My MVP choice for this game will be Ice Cold, the mid laner. So I don't know if that's his name, but that's what is written anyway on his account, Energy Ice Cold. Um, I gave him the MVP because he had a solid performance in Corki. There was like no real no real mistake on his end. It was a good game overall, and I mean, there's not much to say. Just he did what he had to do, and I gave him MVP because he was the one that did the less mistakes in the game. Although like most, no one really made any mistakes in this game. This was a very one-sided game after the early stages, and yeah, it's not an easy decision for this one.